Elara drove a clean line through the bacon grease on the griddle. What she didn't know was that this simple, mundane act of closing down a roadside diner was the last normal thing she would ever do. The rain came down in sheets, a relentless drumming against the flat roof of the Comet's Tail diner. It was a sound that usually soothed her, a gray noise that filled the hollow spaces left behind by a life she no longer lived. Inside, the air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 meals. Stale coffee, lingering onions, the sweet tang of yesterday's syrup. Elara moved with an economy born of repetition, her motions fluid and automatic. Wipe the counter, refill the salt shakers, flip the chairs onto the tables. Each task was a small, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of her own mind. Her reflection in the polished chrome of the coffee machine was a pale, tired ghost. Dark circles smudged beneath her eyes, a permanent tribute to the sleep that never came easy. The face that stared back was a stranger's, someone who hadn't spent 3 tours staring into the sun-scorched abyss of a foreign desert, her hands trying to stitch together bodies that were determined to fall apart. Here, the only wounds were the cracks in the vinyl booths, and the only screams were the hiss of the griddle. It was quiet. It was empty. It was safe. A flicker of the overhead fluorescence. A buzz, then darkness, then a hesitant return to light. The storm was getting worse. The wind howled a low, mournful note around the corners of the building, making the large plate glass windows tremble in their frames. Elara paused, her hand hovering over a stack of clean plates, her head cocked. A different sound had cut through the rhythm of the storm. A scraping noise, metal on asphalt. Her body went rigid. Every nerve ending long dormant snapped to attention. It was the training, the part of her she could never scrub clean. Assess the threat. Identify the source. Her gaze flickered to the front door, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. It was 2 a.m. No one came to the Comet's Tail at this hour unless they were lost or looking for trouble. The scraping stopped. Silence descended again, thick and heavy, broken only by the rain and the hum of the ancient refrigerator. She held her breath, listening, waiting. Nothing. Maybe it was just a branch, torn loose by the wind and dragged across the parking lot. Her shoulders eased down a fraction. She was being paranoid, seeing threats where there were only shadows. Then the bell above the door chimed, a sharp, discordant sound in the oppressive quiet. The man who stumbled inside didn't look lost. He looked like he had been torn from the heart of the storm itself. He was tall, impossibly so, and dressed in clothes that were so finely tailored they looked like a second skin, even now soaked through and torn. Water streamed from his dark hair, plastering it to a face that was all sharp angles and pale, marble-like skin. But it was the wound that seized her attention, that made the medic in her brain scream over the fear. A deep, vicious gash ran from his collarbone down his chest, not bleeding red, but oozing a thick, black substance that seemed to drink the light. The edges of the wound had a strange, silvery sheen, like frost. Black veins spiderwebbed out from the injury, stark and ugly against the pallor of his skin. He took another staggering step, one hand clutched to his chest, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, found hers. They held not pain, but a cold, ancient fury that was far more terrifying. He collapsed. He didn't fall like a normal person. There was a dreadful grace to it, a slow-motion surrender as his long legs gave out and he crumpled to the checkered linoleum floor with a sound that was too soft for a man his size. For a heartbeat, Elara was frozen. Her mind screamed protocols at her. Call 911. Lock the door. Get the phone. But her feet didn't move. Her training as a combat medic warred with every instinct for self-preservation. She saw the wound, not the man. The unnatural color of the blood. The creeping necrosis of the surrounding tissue. This wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a knife wound. It was something else entirely, something alien and wrong. Calling the authorities would bring questions she couldn't answer. It would bring a spotlight into her quiet, dark little world. Her feet moved before her mind made the choice. She knelt beside him, the cold of the floor seeping through the knees of her jeans. The air around him was frigid, a pocket of unnatural cold that raised goosebumps on her arms. "Hey!" she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Hey! Can you hear me?" There was no response. His breathing was shallow, a faint rasp in his chest. She reached out, her fingers hesitating an inch from his throat, searching for a pulse. Her hand trembled. This was insane. He could be dangerous. He was clearly not normal. But the sight of the wound, the clinical puzzle of it, was a siren's call to the part of her that knew how to fix broken things. She touched his neck. His skin was like ice. But beneath it, a pulse throbbed, slow and sluggish, like a dying drum. He was alive. For now. Her gaze went back to the gash. The black ichor was spreading, the spiderweb of dark veins crawling further up his neck. It was a poison, a fast-acting one. She had nothing here. No med kit. No supplies beyond the diner's flimsy first aid box with its cartoon plasters and expired antiseptic wipes. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat. She swallowed it down. Improvise. Adapt. Overcome. The old mantra echoed in her head. She scrambled behind the counter, grabbing a stack of clean bar towels. Ripping one open, she ran back to him. She had to clean the wound, see what she was dealing with. Gently, she began to dab at the black ooze. The moment the clean white cloth touched the substance, it sizzled, turning a sickly gray and dissolving as if touched by acid. A gasp escaped her lips. What in God's name was this? She looked at his face, still and pale in the flickering diner light. He was beautiful in a terrifying, inhuman way, like a statue of a fallen god. That thought was insane, and she pushed it away. Focus on the mission. The mission is to keep him alive. She needed to apply pressure, but the cloth was useless. It would take direct contact. Her mind recoiled from the idea of touching that wound, of letting that black poison touch her skin. It was a stupid risk. Fatal one, maybe, but watching him die on her floor, watching the poison win. She couldn't do it. It was the same feeling she'd had in the desert, the absolute, gut-wrenching refusal to let another life slip through her fingers. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she tossed the dissolving towel aside. She placed her bare hands on either side of the gash, pressing down hard, trying to stanch the flow of the ichor. The world exploded in white light and ice. A current, powerful and electric, surged from his body into hers. It wasn't a shock. It was a connection. A torrent of images, sounds, and feelings flooded her mind. The clash of swords on a field of snow. The scent of ancient libraries and dried blood. A woman's laughter, like silver bells. A roar of pure, untamed rage. Grief, so profound and vast it felt like an ocean, threatened to drown her. It was centuries of existence, of power and loss and loneliness, pouring into her in a single, overwhelming instant. She cried out, her body arching back as the energy coursed through her. But she didn't let go. Her hands, her training, her stubborn refusal to fail, held fast. And as the wave of his life crashed over her, she felt something else. A flicker of warmth from her own core, a small, stubborn light pushing back against the cold. Beneath her palms, something shifted. The silvery frost at the edge of the wound receded. The creeping black veins seemed to hesitate, then slowly, miraculously, begin to fade. The black ichor lessened, its corrosive power weakening. Her touch, her simple human touch, was acting as an antidote. It was impossible. It was happening. The energy receded, leaving her trembling and gasping for air. The visions faded, leaving behind only the echo of immense sorrow. She looked down. Her hands were still pressed to his chest. The wound was still there, still terrible, but it was no longer spreading. The immediate threat seemed to have passed. Exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Her arms shook, her head spun. She felt drained, hollowed out, as if a vital part of her had been siphoned away. She slumped back on her heels, staring at the man on the floor. Who was he? What was he? The lights in the diner flickered again, more violently this time. They buzzed, a high, angry sound, and then went out completely, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The only light came from the red neon open sign, casting a hellish glow over the scene. The temperature in the room dropped precipitously. Her breath plumed in front of her face. The air grew thick, heavy with a pressure that made her ears pop. It felt like the moments before a lightning strike, an atmosphere charged with immense, waiting power. A low groan came from the man on the floor. His eyes snapped open. They were no longer the color of a winter sky. They were glowing, a faint, internal luminescence of pure silver. The fury in them was gone, replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking into her. He moved, not like a wounded man, but like a predator uncoiling. In a single, fluid motion, he was on his feet, towering over her. The weakness, the vulnerability, was gone, burned away by the raw power that now rolled off him in palpable waves. He looked down at his chest, at the wound that was now just a clean, deep cut, the poison completely gone. Then he looked at her, and his expression was one of dawning, dangerous comprehension. "What are you?" he asked. His voice was not the weak rasp of a dying man. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in her bones, a voice accustomed to command, a voice that had echoed in throne rooms and on battlefields for 1,000 years. Elara scrambled backward, crab-walking across the slick floor until her back hit the base of the counter. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I don't know what you're talking about." He took a slow step toward her, his movements silent and unervingly graceful. The red light of the sign carved sharp shadows onto his face, making him look both beautiful and demonic. "You do," he said, his silver eyes narrowing. "You touched me." The Viridian blight, it receded. It does not recede. It only consumes Viridian blight. The name meant nothing to her, but the cold certainty in his voice sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She had done something she shouldn't have been able to do. She had interfered with something ancient and terrible, and now its attention was fixed squarely on her. The front door of the diner burst open, not with a chime, but with a crack of splintering wood as the frame gave way. Two figures stepped into the red-lit darkness. They were dressed in dark, severe suits that seemed to absorb the light. One was a woman with hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes like chips of obsidian. The other was a man, broad and silent as a mountain. They moved with the same predatory grace as the man before her, their gazes sweeping the room before landing on him, then on Elara. "My lord," the woman said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "You are well." It was a statement, not a question. Her dark eyes flickered to the ruined state of his clothes, the wound on his chest, and then to Elara, cowering by the counter. A flicker of something cold and appraising passed through her gaze. The man, the lord, did not look away from Elara. "The human," he said, his voice flat and absolute. "She is the reason I am." The two newcomers turned their full attention on her. It was like being examined by a pair of wolves. Elara felt a primal urge to run, to hide, to make herself small and insignificant. But there was nowhere to go. The vast, empty night outside suddenly seemed infinitely more dangerous than the confines of the diner. "What is she?" the silent man asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I do not know," the lord replied, his silver gaze still locked on Elara. "But she is a cure, and Valerius's poison is still in my veins. She is the only thing holding it at bay." He took another step closer, and Elara flinched. "Her life is now mine. She comes with us." The declaration hung in the air, absolute and final. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, a claim of ownership. The life she had so carefully constructed, her quiet, gray, safe existence, was being dismantled before her very eyes. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "No, you can't. This is my place. My life." A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his marble features. "Your life?" he echoed, a dangerous edge to his tone. "This hollow shell? This waiting room for a death you lack the courage to seek? I saw it in your mind when you touched me. The desert, the blood, the ghosts you run from. You have no life here. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. He had seen inside her. He had seen the things she kept locked away in the deepest, darkest corners of her soul. The shame and the fear washed over her, hot and suffocating. You have a choice, he continued, though his tone made it clear it was no choice at all. You can come with me and you will live, or you can stay here, and my enemies will find you before the sun rises. They will tear you apart to learn the secret of what you did. They will not be as gentle as I am. He extended a hand. It was a large hand, elegant and pale, the hand of an aristocrat or a killer. A hand that held the power to save her or destroy her. Come, he commanded. Elara looked at his hand, then at the two silent figures by the door. She looked around the small, shabby diner that had been her sanctuary, her hiding place. It offered no protection now. Its flimsy walls were no defense against the ancient, terrifying world that had just kicked down her door. He was right. She had been hiding, not living. And the ghosts she ran from were nothing compared to the monsters that were now hunting her. Slowly, her limbs feeling heavy and disconnected, she rose to her feet. She did not take his hand, but she took a step toward him. It was a surrender, an acceptance, a choice made in the absence of any other option. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. Lyra, Kale, he said to his companions, secure the area. Leave no trace. The woman, Lyra, gave a slight bow. It will be as if she was never here, my lord Kalen. The name settled in her mind, heavy and ancient. He turned and walked toward the door, not looking back, confident that she would follow. And she did. She walked past the overturned chairs and the counter she had just wiped clean, past the life she was leaving behind, and out into the raging storm. The world she knew had ended, and a new one, filled with silver-eyed kings and deadly shadows, was just beginning. The car was a long, black machine that seemed to devour the darkness. It was silent, its engine a low thrum that was felt more than heard. Elara was ushered into the back, the leather seats cold against her skin. Kalen sat opposite her, his presence filling the small space, making it hard to breathe. Lyra drove, and the man named Kale sat in the passenger seat, his massive frame a bulwark against the outside world. They drove through the night, the city lights a distant, blurry smear through the rain-streaked windows. No one spoke. The silence was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and palpable power. Elara stared out the window, watching her old world slip away. The familiar streets, the late-night convenience stores, the lonely bus stops. They looked like a foreign country now, a place she could see but never return to. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Vampires, poisons, ancient lords. It was the stuff of fantasy novels, of late-night horror movies. Couldn't be real. But the memory of that energy, that torrent of someone else's life pouring into her, was undeniable. The cold that still clung to the air around Kalen was real. The wound on his chest, now hidden beneath a fresh shirt he had produced from somewhere, was real. She risked a glance at him. He was staring out his own window, his profile etched against the passing lights. The fury was gone, replaced by a deep, weary stillness. He looked like a king in exile, burdened by the weight of centuries. The glimpse she'd had into his mind, the overwhelming grief, it had been real. Beneath the power and the arrogance, there was a wound far deeper than the one on his chest. A part of her, the medic, the healer, felt a flicker of empathy. She crushed it instantly. Empathy was a liability. It was what got you killed. They left the city behind, climbing into hills she didn't know existed. The houses grew larger, more isolated, until they were replaced by old-growth forests that crowded the edges of the winding road. Finally, they turned onto a private drive, marked by no sign, and passed through a gate of wrought iron that swung open without a sound. The destination was not the ancient, cobwebbed castle she might have expected. It was a fortress of modern architecture, all sharp lines of black stone and vast panes of glass, built into the cliffside. It overlooked the city below, a glittering carpet of light that seemed a million miles away. It was a king's vantage point, a place of supreme isolation and control. Inside, the opulence was stark and cold. Floors of polished black marble reflected the minimalist decor. The air was still and cool, scented with something clean and antiseptic, like ozone after a storm. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, no sign that anyone actually lived here. It was a museum or a mausoleum. Kaelin led her into a vast living area. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, showcasing the breathtaking, panoramic view of the storm-lashed city. Lightning spiderwebbed across the sky, momentarily illuminating the room in stark white flashes. He gestured to a severe-looking black leather sofa. "Sit," he commanded. Elara remained standing, wrapping her arms around herself. "You need to tell me what's going on, what you are, what you think I am." Kaelin regarded her for a long moment, his silver eyes unreadable. "What we are is old," he said finally, his voice low. "We are the night that humanity fears, the predators in the stories you tell your children. We are vampires," he said the word without drama, as if stating his name or his occupation. "I am Kaelin, prince of this city's dominion vampire." The word landed in the sterile room with a dead thud. It was ridiculous, and yet it explained everything. The cold skin, the unnatural speed, the aura of power, the glowing eyes. "And the poison?" she asked, her voice tight. "Viridian blight," he said, his expression darkening. "A rare and potent poison created from the essence of a silver dragon scale, designed for one purpose, to kill one of my kind. It is an agony that unravels us from the inside out. There is no cure. But I stopped it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Yes," he said, his gaze intensifying. "You did. When you touched me, your life force, your very essence, acted as a counteragent. It did not heal me, but it has forced the poison into a state of dormancy. As long as you are near me, it is held in check. If you were to leave," he let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. His life was now tethered to hers. "So you're kidnapping me?" she stated, a spark of her old defiance flaring up. "I'm your prisoner. Your living medicine cabinet. You are my guest," he corrected, though there was no warmth in the word. "And you are under my protection. The one who poisoned me is a rival, a usurper named Valerius. He believed me to be dead or dying. When he learns that I live, he will seek the reason. And when he finds you, he will take you. He will not be interested in your guest's rights. He will drain you dry to study the properties of your blood, or he will simply kill you to ensure my own death." The cold reality of her situation settled over her like a shroud. She was trapped between two ancient monsters in a war she didn't understand. Her quiet life was gone forever. "Why me?" she asked, the question a raw plea. "What's so special about me? I'm nobody." "That is the question I intend to answer," Kaelin said. "There are legends, old tales from before my time, of humans with bright blood. Mortals whose life force resonates on a frequency that can soothe our afflictions, mend our wounds, and counteract the oldest poisons. They were called sun-touched. It was believed they were all hunted to extinction centuries ago. It seems the legends were wrong. Sun-touched. The name felt alien, a label for someone else, someone powerful and magical. Not for her, Elara, the broken medic who ran a graveyard shift at a Greasy Spoon diner. "You are now the single most valuable being in this city," Kaelin continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "And the most vulnerable. You will remain here, where I can protect you. Lyra will see to your needs. You will want for nothing, except the life you knew." He turned and walked toward the wall of glass, staring out at the city that was his kingdom. The conversation was over. She had been given her orders, her new reality laid out before her like a map to a foreign, hostile land. Elara sank onto the cold leather of the sofa, the fight draining out of her. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, a linchpin in a supernatural war, a cure for a king of shadows. The ghosts of the desert suddenly seemed like very small, very distant things. The days that followed blurred into a strange, timeless rhythm. The penthouse was a world unto itself, hermetically sealed from the sunlit reality she had once known. The vast windows were made of a special glass that polarized as the sun rose, plunging the interior into a perpetual twilight. Her life was governed by the setting of the sun, the time when the fortress came alive. Kalen was a ghost during the day, sleeping in some hidden part of the residence she was not permitted to see. But as dusk fell, his presence would return. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a drop in temperature, a feeling of being watched. Lyra became her keeper. The silver-haired vampire was efficient, courteous, and utterly remote. She brought Elara food she didn't feel like eating, clothes she hadn't chosen, and books she couldn't focus on. Elara spent most of her time pacing the vast, empty rooms, a restless captive. She would stand at the great window for hours, watching the city breathe below. The cars were tiny, glittering insects. The people were an anonymous swarm. She felt a profound, aching disconnect, as if she were watching a film of a life she used to be a part of. Her nights were filled with the old terrors. The nightmares returned with a vengeance, dragging her back to the blood and the dust and the screaming. She would wake up with her heart pounding, her sheets tangled and soaked with sweat, the name of a fallen comrade on her lips. On several occasions, she would find Kalen standing in the doorway of her room, a silent, shadowed figure. He never spoke. He would just watch her for a moment with those unnerving silver eyes, and then retreat back into the darkness. It was during one of these nights, about a week into her captivity, that something shifted. She had woken from a particularly violent nightmare, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She sat up, clutching her knees, trying to ground herself in the cold, sterile reality of the room. The door was ajar. Kalen stood there as he often did. "The same dream?" he asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual commanding tone. She flinched, pulling the sheet tighter around her. "What do you care?" she shot back, her voice raw. He walked into the room, a first. He stopped at the foot of her bed. In the dim light filtering in from the hallway, she could see the weariness in his face. The poison, though dormant, was taking its toll. "I know what it is to be haunted," he said. The faces of the dead are persistent companions. His words, so unexpected in their empathy, disarmed her. "You can't possibly understand," she whispered. "Can't I?" A bitter, mirthless smile touched his lips. "I had a wife once. Asson. Valerius took them from me 400 years ago. He did not just kill them. He made me watch the grief she had felt when she first touched him washed over her again. A cold tide of memory. The silver bell laughter. The pain." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not a king or a monster, but someone as haunted as she was. "We are both survivors, Elara. We just carry different wars inside us." He turned and left, leaving her in a silence that was heavier than before. His confession, his moment of shared vulnerability, had changed the dynamic between them. He was still her captor. She was still his prisoner. But a fragile, tenuous thread of understanding had been spun between them in the dark. Her presence was clearly having its intended effect. The dark veins that had once marred his skin were gone. The wound on his chest had healed into a pale silver scar. But she could see the effort it took for him to maintain his strength. He was a king holding his kingdom together through sheer force of will, and she was the secret pillar that kept it all from collapsing. This new, fragile piece was shattered 2 weeks after her arrival. Elara was in the library, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with ancient, leather-bound books, when she felt it. A tremor, not in the building but in the air itself. A sudden, violent disruption of the oppressive quiet. It was followed by a sound from the main living area. A high-pitched shriek of stressed metal and then the explosive crash of shattering glass. Alarms blared. A deafening, pulsing klaxon. Red lights flashed, bathing the cool gray corridors in a bloody light. Kale, the silent mountain of a vampire, appeared in the library doorway. His face, usually a stoic mask, was grim. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Do not move from this room." He slid a heavy metal door shut, and she heard the thud of a dozen locks engaging. She was sealed in. The sounds of battle filtered through the thick door, shouts, snarls that were not quite human, the sickening crunch of bone. Fear, cold and absolute, seized her. Valerius. He had found them. He had found her. She paced the length of the library, her heart a frantic drum. She was a liability. Target. Kalen was out there, fighting for his life, for her life, and she was locked away, useless. The combat medic in her screamed at the injustice of it. She was trained to run toward the fire, not hide from it. The sounds of the fight grew louder, closer. A heavy thud slammed against the library door, making the entire wall shudder. Elara flattened herself against the far wall, her eyes wide with terror. They were trying to get in. They were trying to get to her. Suddenly, the fighting stopped. The alarms cut out. A dreadful, ringing silence descended. It was worse than the noise. Elara held her breath, straining to hear anything. A soft click came from the door. One by one, the locks disengaged. She braced herself, grabbing a heavy silver letter opener from the desk, a pathetic weapon against the beings outside. The door slid open. Kalen stood there. He was splattered with a dark, viscous liquid that she knew was not his own. His fine clothes were torn, and a fresh cut bled freely from his temple. But his eyes, his silver eyes, burned with a triumphant, feral light. Behind him, Lyra and Kale were similarly disheveled but alive. The main living area was a war zone. The great window was a spiderweb of cracks. The bodies of 4 black-clad figures lay twisted on the marble floor, already beginning to dissolve into ash. "They were testing our defenses," Kalen said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "A probe." He sent his elite guard. He looked at Elara, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injury. They did not get close, but they had. The attack had breached his fortress. It had proven that she was not safe here. Nowhere was safe. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and the wolves were circling. "This changes things," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur. "Valerius will not stop. He is growing bolder. He thinks because I am weakened by his poison, I am vulnerable." He walked to the cracked window, staring down at the city. "He has forgotten what it means to hunt a king in his own forest." He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. The fragile truce between them was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a warlord. "The passive approach has failed," he declared. "We are no longer content to wait for his next move. We will take the fight to him. And you," he said, his silver eyes pinning her in place, "will be at the center of it." The next few weeks were a blur of tension and preparation. The penthouse was no longer a quiet sanctuary, but a war room. Kalen's most trusted lieutenants, ancient and powerful vampires from across his dominion, came and went like shadows, their hushed conversations filled with strategy and reports of Valerius's movements. Elara was a ghost in their midst, a silent observer of a deadly chess game. Kalen pushed himself to the brink. He spent his nights in the training room, a vast, armored chamber in the deepest level of the fortress. The sounds of his exertions, the clang of steel and the snarls of effort, would echo faintly through the structure. Elara knew he was testing the limits of his poison-restrained strength, trying to compensate for the weakness Valerius sought to exploit. Her role in this new phase was passive, yet crucial. She was to remain close to Kalen whenever possible. Her presence was a balm to the poison, allowing him to function at a higher capacity. She became his shadow, following him from the war room to the library to the armory. The proximity was a strange form of intimacy, born of necessity. They rarely spoke of personal matters, but a silent understanding grew between them. She saw the immense burden of his leadership, the centuries of loneliness etched into his features when he thought no one was watching. He, in turn, seemed to sense her moments of panic, the times when the ghosts of her past grew too loud. A steadying glance, a brief, almost imperceptible nod. These small gestures became their language. One evening, she found him in the armory, sharpening a sword that seemed to be forged from solidified night. The blade drank the light, leaving no reflection. "You should learn to defend yourself," he said without looking up, his voice echoing slightly in the stone room. "I'm a medic, not a soldier," she replied, her standard response. "You were a soldier long enough to learn how to handle a weapon," he countered, finally meeting her gaze. "I saw it in your memories. You are not helpless, Elara. You have simply chosen to be." His words stung because they were true. She had packed away that part of herself, buried it deep. "What's the point?" she asked, her voice bitter. "What can I do against beings like you? A gun is a pea shooter. A knife is a toothpick. The body has its own weapons," he said, setting the sword aside. "And your mind is the sharpest of all. You see things differently than we do. You analyze, you adapt. We have power, but we are also creatures of habit, of ancient grudges and rigid protocols. You are not. That makes you unpredictable. And in a war, the unpredictable is often what wins." He began to train her. Not in the art of fighting one of his kind, that was a fool's errand. He trained her in awareness, in evasion, in using her environment. He honed the instincts her military service had given her, adapting them for this new, deadlier battlefield. He taught her to recognize the subtle signs of a vampire's presence, the scent of ozone that clung to their power, the way they displaced the air when they moved with speed. The physical contact during their training sessions was a new and dangerous territory. Every time he corrected her posture, his touch sent a jolt through her, a reminder of the strange connection between them. It wasn't just her affecting him. The link flowed both ways. She could feel the immense, coiled power within him, the raging storm of the poison held in check by her proximity. It was terrifying and intoxicating. The final confrontation came sooner than they expected. Intelligence gathered by Elara revealed Valerius's plan. He was not planning another assault on the fortress. He was orchestrating a coup. He had called a conclave, a formal gathering of the city's vampire nobility, to be held at a neutral location, the old, abandoned Grand Cathedral downtown. There, he intended to publicly challenge Kalen, using Kalen's perceived weakness from the poison as justification to seize control of the Dominion. It was a bold, political move backed by force. To refuse the challenge would be to admit weakness and cede power. "He is forcing my hand," Kalen said, standing before the war room's holographic map of the city. "He knows I cannot bring my full guard into the cathedral. The conclave's laws are absolute. It will be just me, my seconds, and him." "And me," Elara said, her voice quiet but firm. Kalen turned to her, his brow furrowed. "No. It is too dangerous. You will remain here, where you are safe. And what happens when you're 100 feet away from me?" she challenged, stepping forward. "The poison will flare. You'll be at half strength, maybe less. He's counting on that. That's his entire plan. I have to be there." "She is right, my lord," Kale rumbled from the corner. "Her presence is your greatest weapon. And your only chance." Kalen stared at her, his silver eyes warring with a conflict she couldn't name. It was more than just strategic concern. It was a raw, possessive fear of putting her in harm's way. But he was a king before all else, and strategy had to win. "Very well," he conceded, his voice tight. "You will not leave my side. Not for an instant. Lyra, Kale, you are my seconds. We go tonight." The Grand Cathedral was a skeleton of forgotten faith. Its stained glass windows shattered, its pews covered in centuries of dust. Moonlight streamed through the holes in the roof, illuminating the cavernous space in ethereal, silver beams. Dozens of vampires lined the walls, their forms still and silent as statues, their eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. They were the city's nobility, the ancient and powerful, gathered to witness a shift in power. Valerius stood at the altar, a confident smirk on his handsome face. He was Kalen's opposite in every way, fair where Kalen was dark, his movements theatrical where Kalen's were economical. He radiated a decadent, cruel charisma. Kalen walked down the central aisle, Elara at his side, Lyra and Kale a step behind. A murmur rippled through the assembled vampires. The sight of a human in this sacred, deadly space was a shock. Elara could feel their collective gaze on her, a physical weight of curiosity and contempt. She kept her eyes forward, her hand hovering near the hilt of the small, weighted blade Kaelin had given her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face was a mask of calm. "Kaelin," Valerius greeted, his voice smooth as velvet. "How good of you to come. I feared you were unwell. And you have brought a pet." His eyes, the color of burgundy wine, lingered on Elara with predatory amusement. "This is no pet, Valerius." Kaelin's voice was cold as the grave, echoing in the vast space. "This is the woman who undid your treachery. She is the reason your poison failed." The smirk on Valerius's face tightened. He had not expected this public declaration. He had meant to paint Kaelin as weak, hiding a festering wound. Instead, Kaelin had turned it, presenting Elara as a symbol of his resilience. "A human cure?" Valerius laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "How pathetic you have become, old friend. Reduced to relying on the cattle we feed upon. The Dominion needs a strong leader, not one tethered to a mortal plaything." He drew a long, elegant saber from a sheath at his hip. "I challenge you for rule. Trial by combat. Here and now." "I accept," Kaelin said, drawing his own night-black sword. The duel began. It was nothing like the brawling fights of humans. It was a dance of impossible speed and deadly grace. They moved like blurs, their blades meeting with high, singing clashes that echoed through the cathedral. Sparks flew, silver and gold, as ancient steel met ancient steel. Kaelin was magnificent, a whirlwind of controlled fury, but Elara could see it. A slight hesitation in his parry, a fraction of a second too slow in his riposte. The poison, even suppressed by her presence, was a drag on his power. Valerius saw it too. He pressed his advantage, his attacks growing faster, more ferocious. He was a fencer, all precision and flair, while Kaelin was a swordsman, all power and defense. Valerius scored the first cut, a shallow line of red across Kaelin's arm. The assembled vampires murmured. The tide was turning. Kaelin fought back, his jaw set, but he was on the defensive. He was losing. Elara's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. She was useless, a spectator to the battle that would decide her fate. Then Valerius changed his tactics. He disengaged, leaping back toward the altar. "Fighting you is tiresome, Kaelin," he sneered. "Let's see how you fight your own ghosts." He raised a hand, and his wine-red eyes began to glow with an inner light. He chanted a single word, ancient and guttural, that seemed to warp the very air. The temperature in the cathedral plunged. The moonlight streaming through the roof turned a sickly, bruised purple. Kaelin staggered, his sword tip dropping to the dusty floor. He cried out, a raw, agonized sound. His eyes, fixed on a point just past Valerius, widened in horror and disbelief. "No," he whispered. "It cannot be." Elara knew instantly what was happening. It was an illusion, a psychological attack. Valerius was forcing Kaelin to relive his greatest trauma, the memory of his family's murder. He was paralyzed, trapped in a 400-year-old nightmare. Valerius laughed, a triumphant, cruel sound. He began to advance on the frozen Kaelin, his saber raised for the killing blow. "Goodbye, old friend," he mocked. Lyra and Kael started forward, but were blocked by Valerius's own seconds, two hulking brutes who drew their weapons with grim smiles. They were bound by the laws of the duel. They could not interfere. But Elara was not bound by their laws. In that split second, everything became clear. Her training, Kaelin's words, her own instincts. It all coalesced into a single, decisive moment. Raw power could not win this fight, but maybe something else could. She ran. She sprinted across the stone floor, her boots echoing in the sudden silence as everyone watched, stunned by her audacity. She ignored Valerius, ignored his raised saber. Her focus was entirely on Kaelin. She reached him just as Valerius lunged. Without hesitating, she threw her arms around Kaelin from behind, pressing her cheek against his back, and grabbed his sword hand with both of hers. "Kaelin!" she yelled, her voice ringing with desperate clarity. "It's not real. Look at me. It's an illusion." The moment her skin touched his, the connection between them flared, brighter and more powerful than ever before. It wasn't a flood of his memories into her this time. It was the reverse. She poured everything she was into him. Her own stubborn reality, the grit of the desert, the smell of diner coffee, the feeling of the rain on her face, the sharp, grounding reality of her own traumatic memories. She pushed her solid, messy, human world into his, a bulwark against the phantoms of the past. The sickly purple light flickered. The illusion shattered like glass. Kaelin's head snapped up, the haze of memory gone from his eyes, replaced by a silver fire of pure, undiluted rage. He saw Valerius, his saber descending. He saw Elara, clinging to him, her face set with fierce determination. He moved, with Elara still holding his arm. He twisted, bringing his night-black sword up in a devastating arc. It was not a block or a parry. It was an attack. The blade met Valerius's saber, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. It did not stop. It continued its path, slicing clean through Valerius's chest. A look of utter shock crossed Valerius's face. He looked down at the black sword embedded in his torso, then up at Kaelin. "The human!" He choked, a black substance bubbling from his lips. Kaelin ripped his sword free. Valerius crumpled to his knees, his body already beginning to crumble, to turn to dust and shadow. His reign of ambition was over. Silence. The entire cathedral was frozen in stunned silence. A human, a mere mortal, had interfered in a sacred duel and, in doing so, had saved their prince. She had done what raw power could not. Kaelin turned slowly, his silver eyes finding hers. The rage was gone, replaced by an emotion she had never seen there before. A raw, profound gratitude that left him momentarily speechless. He reached up and gently touched her face, his thumb tracing a line along her jaw. His touch was not cold now, but warm. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice rough. "You saved me first," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. He looked out at the assembled vampires, his expression hardening back into the mask of the king. "Valerius is dead," he proclaimed, his voice booming through the hall. "His challenge has been met. His treason has been punished. This conclave is over." He kept his arm around Elara, a clear and unmistakable gesture to all who watched. She was not his pet. She was not his cure. She was his ally, his savior. He led her from the cathedral, away from the whispers and the shocked stares, back into the clean, quiet dark of the night. The war was over, but for them, something new was just beginning. The aftermath was quiet, a slow exhalation after a lifetime of holding a breath. The penthouse was still, the air no longer thick with the tension of impending war. Valerius's faction had crumbled overnight, its leader turned to ash. Kaelin's rule was absolute, stronger and more secure than it had been in a century. And it was all because of her. She stood by the great window, now seamlessly repaired, looking down at the city lights. She felt calm. The ghosts in her head were quiet for the first time in years. They had been replaced by a new, solid reality, one that was just as dangerous, but one where she was not a victim. She was a participant, a survivor. Kaelin came to stand beside her. He had shed his battle-worn clothes for a simple black shirt and trousers. The silver scar on his chest was a stark reminder of where this had all begun. "The poison is gone," he said quietly. "Completely. When Valerius died, the magic of his curse died with him. My debt to you is paid." Elara turned to look at him. "So I'm free to go," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "I can have Lyra take you anywhere you want. A new life, a new name. No one will ever find you. I can even have your memory of this time erased if you wish. You can go back to your quiet life." He was offering her an escape, an out, a return to the gray, safe world of the Comet's Tail diner, of lonely apartments and sleepless nights, a life of hiding. She thought of the smell of stale coffee, the endless wiping of counters, the profound, crushing emptiness of it all. That wasn't a life. It was a half-life. It was a ghost story. Here, in this world of shadows and ancient powers, she had faced down monsters. She had found a strength she thought was long buried. She had looked into the abyss, and for the first time, she hadn't flinched. She looked from the city lights back to his silver eyes. They held no command now, only a quiet, waiting hope. "I don't want my old life back," she said, her voice clear and steady. "There's nothing there for me." A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost pain, crossed his face. "And here?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What is there for you here?" "I don't know yet," she admitted with a small, wry smile. "But I think I'd like to find out." He took a step closer, his presence a familiar comfort now, not a threat. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The connection between them sparked, not with the violence of their first meeting or the desperation of the battle, but with a quiet, steady warmth. "Promise. The Dominion will need to be rebuilt," he said. "There are traitors to be rooted out, alliances to be reforged. It will be dangerous." "My whole life has been dangerous," she replied. "This is just a different kind of war." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so ancient and reverent it made her heart stop. "Then stay," he said. "Stay, not as my cure, not as my guest, but as my partner." She looked at their joined hands, then up into his ancient, hopeful eyes. The choice was so simple, so clear. It was the first choice she had made for herself in a very long time. It was a choice not born of fear or survival, but of want. "Okay," she said. The woman who once wiped down counters in a lonely diner was gone, turned to ash just as surely as the vampire lord who had threatened her king. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in the crucible of a hidden war. She was no longer a refugee from her own life, but the architect of a new one, standing beside a king of shadows at the dawn of his new reign. Her war was not over. It had simply found its true battlefield, and for the first time she felt like she was on the verge of victory.